The article that we chose for our project was titled Differential Involvement of the Left Prefrontal Cortex in Inductive and Deductive Reasoning by Vinod Goel and Raymond J. Dolan, written in 2004. The purpose of this study was to try to identify distinct localizations in the left prefrontal cortex for the cognitive processes of inductive and deductive reasoning tasks. The basic question of this experiment was motivated by the process of reasoning, defined by Goel and Dolan as the process of drawing inferences from given information. In the past, inductive and deductive reasoning have always been categorized as coming from different branches of thought processing. The researchers were especially interested in the role that the prefrontal cortex played in both types of reasoning. The prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that was closely analyzed during this experiment, is located in the anterior part of the frontal lobes of the brain and is responsible for cognitive behaviors and complex decision-making. Thus, this is the perfect part of the brain to focus on for a test of the neural pathways involved in inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is arriving at a conclusion based upon a set of observations, whereas deductive reasoning is where a person makes a conclusion based on previously known facts. A similar study was done by Goel, Gold, Kapoor, and Houle in 1997, which used a PET scan, which is a less precise model and is harder to show the accuracy of a single event. Therefore, in the current experiment, an fMRI was used to give a better analysis of the neuroanatomy of the two separate events. A similarly interesting study about deductive reasoning was performed by Knopf, Malak, Kasubik, Salil, and Grunil. They tested blood oxygen level on independent contrasts of patients while they answered reasoning tasks while inside an fMRI, and they found that the highest activation was in the prefrontal cortex. Another interesting study was done by Moreno and Hirsch, which looked at the neural mechanisms for deductive reasoning. The experimenters used an fMRI and audio and visual stimuli to look at the activated parts of the brain. They found that
So, this part of the video is going to describe the methods used in the study. The study involved 16 subjects, 8 males and 8 females. All were right-handed, and the median age was about 27 and a half. For the stimulus, the researchers created 50 deductive arguments and 50 inductive arguments for the participants to view. A deductive argument consists of several premises and a conclusion. A deductive argument is valid if the conclusions must follow from the premises. An example of a valid deductive argument would be, all humans are mortal. I am a human. Conclusion, I am immortal. A deductive argument is invalid if the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the premises. An example of an invalid deductive argument would be, all humans are mortal. Bob is mortal, therefore Bob is a human. This is invalid because Bob isn't necessarily a human. Bob could be a cat or a pet fish or anything else that's mortal. An inductive argument also has several premises and a conclusion. However, inductive arguments are evaluated for plausibility rather than validity, making them slightly more difficult to quantify. An example of a plausible inductive argument would be, house cats have 32 teeth. Lions have 32 teeth? Conclusion, all felines have 32 teeth. It is not necessarily the case that all felines have 32 teeth, but this is a plausible conclusion to draw from the premises. An example of an implausible inductive argument would be, house cats have 32 teeth. Lions have 32 teeth? Conclusion, all elephants have trunks. Regardless of whether all elephants have trunks, the premises do not seem to support that conclusion. It's implausible. The deductive and inductive arguments used in this study were divided as follows. 25 valid and 25 invalid deductive arguments, 25 plausible and 25 implausible inductive arguments. The participants were presented with these arguments while inside of an fMRI. The participants were instructed to analyze the arguments and then press one of two buttons, one to indicate that the argument was valid or plausible, and one to indicate that it was invalid or implausible. The fMRI scanned their brains as they performed this test. The area of interest in this study was the neural activity that followed the presentation of a conclusion, during the time that the participants were reasoning the arguments in their minds. It was determined that the blood flow to the brain differed depending on the type of argument analyzed. While many areas of the brain displayed activity, two findings were of particular significance. The first is that deductive reasoning strongly activated the left inferior frontal gyrus, significantly more than inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, activated the left middle frontal gyrus and the left superior occipital gyrus, significantly more than deductive reasoning.
Alright, for this part of the video we are going to talk about the discussion. The findings of the study provide evidence of left hemisphere dominance in human reasoning and help identify specific brain regions that are directly responsible for inductive and deductive reasoning. Induction and deduction do not activate both hemispheres but only one. Both inductive and deductive reasoning stimulate the left prefrontal cortex. More precisely, deduction shows increased functioning in Broca's area, which is associated with synaptic processing and working memory. Induction excites the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is affiliated with general knowledge from the surrounding world. We thought the study presented a good amount of arguments with equal chances of receiving a valid or invalid statement. However, the study could have been better if there were more participants and if there was another way to capture the effect of the statements on the brain, for example on the EEG. An interesting follow-up to the study would be to see how the visual system and auditory system affect the interpretation of inductive and deductive reasoning on the brain. A future study could be to isolate either pathway and record how the brain responds differently or even the same to those stimuli. We thought the study showed how specific brain regions are responsible for different tasks. Although the brain is a bunch of puzzle pieces working together, there are times when only a small part of a piece is needed. Lastly, if a person had damage to the left prefrontal cortex, it would be hard for them to differentiate between inductive and deductive reasoning. This could possibly cause problems in everyday life.